All right. Good afternoon. Thanks for coming to this iteration of the InterAgency Brown Bag Lecture Series. I'm Rod Cox. I'm with the Command and General Staff College Foundation and the Simon Center. It's our pleasure on behalf of our partners, the Command and General Staff School, Colonel Rob Alt and Mr. Marv Nichols, to partner with them to bring you this InterAgency Brown Bag Lecture Series. The lecture series is made possible by several sponsors, the Perot Family Foundation, and then our good friends at First Command. Susan and JJ, thanks a lot. We appreciate you being here and appreciate support so we can do these lectures. A couple of admin announcements. Upcoming lectures. Some of you might remember the weather we had a couple weeks ago closed everything down. We will have on the 26th of February, the next of our presentations in the Pershing Lecture Series, and that'll be downtown at the Riverfront Community Center, the old train station downtown Leavenworth, 6 o'clock. We'll have a iteration of the Pershing Lecture Series where we'll have Dr. Dean Nowinski talk about a presentation of the success against the odds. He'll discuss the American Army and the occupation of Germany after World War I. So once again, the 26th of February, about a week and a half come Tuesday, 6 o'clock down for a wine and cheese reception, and then 6:30 he'll make his presentation start. So you're welcome to come there. We'd love to see you. Secondly, our next iteration of the Brown Bag Lecture Series here is going to be on 5 March. And that presentation will be on interagency leadership, and our speaker is going to be Lieutenant General Mike Lundy. So the CG will be here to present on that lecture series. Administratively, we are recording this session for our satellite students and our distance learning, as well as our interagency partners that watch it off the line. So what that means is if you have a question to engage our speaker, please make sure you come up to one of the microphones. Don't need to do anything. The folks in the control room will turn them on. But if you have a question or you want to engage dialogue with our presenter, please make sure you're at one of the microphone stations for you gentlemen that are in the back. All right. In the often confusing world, and sometimes shadowy world, actually, of national intelligence community, the Defense Intelligence Agency is one of the least understood of those organizations. DIA operates in support of the warfighter as well as in support of our policymakers. It operates both overtly with its corps of defense attachés, as well as covertly, conducting operations in support of U.S. interests around the world. It's the nation's premier all-source military intelligence organization, providing authoritative assessments of foreign military intentions and capabilities. Now, it's our privilege to have today Mr. Roderic Jackson, who is the Defense Intelligence Chair at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College and the DIA representative to the Combined Arms Center. He has over 30 years of experience in the national security affairs arena with a long-term interest in Africa studies. Mr. Jackson has worked for DIA for over 16 years as a military and civilian employee. During his many assignments and deployments, he's worked as a defense attaché and as a policy advisor at numerous commands to include AFRICOM, CENTCOM, and EUCOM. He holds a bachelor's degree from the United States Military Academy and master's degrees in international relationships, international business, and strategic intelligence. He is conversant in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. Please welcome Mr. Roderic Jackson.
Thank you. Okay, it's a great pleasure to actually get here and finally get this done. I've watched my colleagues do this over the last several months, and it's good to finally get this done. So I'll try not to mix all these languages as we get started and get this going. I'm going to try and talk to us about DIA. It's really great to talk about my organization. I really like it. I'll stand at the podium some. I'll move around. I have 3 challenges. 1 is not to talk too fast. 2 is to talk clearly. And 3 is not to jump around too much. I've got an agenda to kind of take us through some of that. So what I'm going to do is I'll talk from the kind of oneness of our agency, of the international community, intelligence community. I'll talk through our missions and our core competencies. And at the end, I'll try and show us how this all comes together, how it kind of makes sense, at least in my mind. This is unclassified and sort of if you go back to DIA, they may tell you, no, this is not exactly how we look, so it's not official. It's unofficial. But it definitely reflects my numerous years of experience of what we've been doing and also work with all our colleagues across the world.
Breaking new details about North Korea's missile launch. Russia test firing its new intercontinental ballistic missile nicknamed Satan II.
The international situation is the most complex and demanding that I have seen in all my years of service.
Now Iran is expanding its military operations inside Syria. China is increasingly flexing its military muscle.
The U.S. is now confronted with simultaneous challenges in Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and of course violent extremism.
New propaganda videos from ISIS appear to show armed drones dropping explosives on troops.
From U.S. businesses to the federal government to state and local governments, we are under cyber attack.
Russian-backed propaganda spread to millions of Americans.
Russia appears to have figured out how to crash a power grid with a click.
2-year multi-stage effort by Russian government hackers.
Countries like China are actively testing anti-satellite weapons.
You can't armor a satellite the way you would a tank. The stakes are immeasurable, not just for the American military, but for our way of life.
Our potential adversaries have not been waiting around. They've been studying us. They're innovating and modernizing faster than we are.
Our competitors are working to develop more advanced technologies, which pose an increasing challenge to our warfighters, our decision makers, and the intelligence community. We got to be more efficient. We got to be more lethal. We are the defense and defense intelligence.
DIA is ready at a moment's notice to respond to these global challenges that threaten Americans and our way of life, providing unparalleled intelligence expertise, knowledge, and technological capability to leaders at all levels of the U.S. military and government. Our mission is to provide all-source intelligence on foreign military capabilities and operating environments. DIA's intelligence analysis is critical to understanding and deterring threats, from foreign military capabilities and weapon systems to cyber threats, medical and health emergencies, hidden underground facilities, and terrorism. DIA officers are stationed around the world, devoted to understanding the global environment. Their first-hand insights guide us in pursuit of our most difficult targets. From missile tests to biological sensors, from cell phone extractions to biometric exploitation, DIA provides special tools and innovative technology to provide critical insight where other collection methods cannot. With a presence in over 140 countries, we provide intelligence support and classified information systems from the Oval Office to deployed forces on the ground. We have taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We speak truth to power and safeguard the information with which we have been entrusted. We do this to protect the freedoms of all Americans, our allies, and future generations around the world, committed to excellence in defense of the nation. DIA.
Okay, so I tease us with this clip here to get us to start thinking about intelligence. And also, I could actually quit now because we've actually talked about what DIA does. Not really. I'll make some comments and they'll be my attempts at dry sarcasm. But when I started this kind of journey about 1999, I asked the question. It was a curious journey between foreign area officers and intelligence. I said to my leaders, I said, what is Africa? And they told me you're going to work Africa. What is Africa and where is it? How do you spell it? At that point, I started my journey in learning about intelligence. Until this day, I'm still trying to understand more about what it means. But for me, simply put, intelligence helps us understand these concepts, these entities, these complex problems perhaps, help us understand how they operate and affect what the USG wants to do, what we want to accomplish. So our job as intelligence professionals at DIA is to really kind of peel back the onion, figure out these things, show how they impact, and to get them to these impacts, possible impacts to our leadership so that they can work on them. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, my first slide, one team, one fight. DIA is part of the intelligence community. There are 16 of us in the community. In many cases, some folks consider the Office of National Director of Intelligence as an agency, so sometimes you may hear 17. But we're all in it to do one thing, to support U.S. policy. In many cases, our people will argue our primary customer is the president, which I agree. But we actually are there for USG, to ensure that our leaders have the information they need to continue to work in this global world and for our enduring interests, which we've discussed probably in our military careers for such a long time. Our director, General Ashley. He's 21st director. I understand that he has a long, enduring relationship with CGSC because of his previous jobs. And we're actually working with some folks back at DIA to try and bring him back out here again. I'm not sure when it's going to happen, and I'm not sure day to day exactly where that initiative is, but hopefully we'll get him back out here sometime in the next year or so. Okay, our mission. So you heard the folks talk on the video clip. You heard me talk a little bit. You heard Rob talk a little bit. And I kind of pointed out several different things. So I'll let you kind of read through it, but I'll hit the highlight ones. Combat Support Agency. So I went back and I kind of took a look at this because we take this for granted, this Combat Support Agency, and trying to peel it back and say, what does it mean? Well, for DIA, we have a dual mission. We have a mission that we support policymakers in DC. We support all these these department level activities, which could span from foreign disclosure, training and education, to providing communications across the DoD enterprise. We're also tasked with the mission of going down to the foxhole and working with our warfighters. And that's kind of a unique mission. Not all the agencies have this, but we are tasked to go down when necessary and work at the foxhole. The first time I heard this, I thought it was like, what does this mean? DIA doesn't go to the foxhole. Well, they don't necessarily go always directly to the foxhole, but they can. And we'll talk about that as we move through. Next thing up here is prevent strategic surprise. Super important. All you got to do is think about Georgia circa 2009. You can go way back and think about Pearl Harbor. And the question is, what would our leadership done if they had had this prior warning, prior knowledge? And that's what we do. We exist to get that, to eliminate or reduce strategic surprise and get this decision advantage, which is the next highlighted point, to our leadership. If we can do that to our leadership, our warfighters, our planners, and all the other folks up there, then we're doing our job. Now, in many cases, I think that the job as an intelligence professional could be considered thankless. And the reason I say it is because you get a lot of feedback if you don't get this strategic surprise thing right. But if you get the right decision advantage to our leadership and they're able to work on opportunities to defeat our adversaries or whatever their intentions are, then no one's going to come and tell you this is a great job, you did this, and public recognition. But you will get that if we don't get it right. So we're vested in what we do, we believe in what we do, and we work at it very hard every day. So a note on our history. So Rob McNamara put us on the map sometime around 1961, and I think we probably got our strategic legs probably with the Cuban crisis, where we were instrumental in analyzing what the Soviets and what the Russians were doing, what the Soviets and what the Cubans were doing with the missiles. From that time on, we basically were into building our capabilities and building out our mission sets. You can see in the 80s, we actually hit the bullseye with the Soviet military power. That was so well received, it was reduced from 80 to 91 with the fall of the wall. And sometimes you ask myself today, it's like, do we need something else? As we see the resurgence of Russia in world affairs. In the 90s, this 2,000 person deployed is a nice benchmark for us because it's actually probably where we got our expeditionary legs from. So, since that time on, you can see DIA, and we'll talk about a little bit more, all over the world. And it's been involved in all these expeditionary operations. And that's kind of the stay. 2000 on, we're a household name. We're inextricably linked to military intelligence, to supporting our warfighters, and we have a privileged place in trying to help support, guide, shape policy across our USG. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about strategic realities. I kind of couch this as what keeps the boss up at night. This is from 2018, March. The chiefs went to the House, went to the Capitol Hill. I think on the 19th, they adjusted some of this, so it's kind of updated a little bit. but most of the same things. So what are we doing with North Korea? How are we supporting these negotiations, keeping them honest about their nuclear aspirations? You see Don Coates says, hey, you know, speak truth to power. Our job is to speak it. It may not be popular, it may not get acted upon, but our job is to be non-biased, non-political, and tell the truth based on the data as we see it. So we go about doing that. China, you know, theft of technology, we'll go down cyber threats. You know, how do we counter those things? How do we make our systems harden? That's pretty much some of the things that keeps us up all night. And then just down to hit it again is the terrorist organizations. I'll leave it with that. ISIS, is ISIS dead? We're still watching. We're watching as we figure out what they're going to do next in Syria. My neck of the woods that I watch very carefully, Africa. We see ISIS across the continent. We see them continue to be inspirational and be able to conduct attacks, especially outside of Somalia, all the way down to Uganda. Okay, DIA at a glance. So we've got about 16.5 employees, 16.5K employees across the world. That's kind of the most official count that we have. The mix is about 74-26 in terms of military folks, military versus civilians. It is a military organization run by a military leader, but the continuity belongs to civilians. Most of the department heads, many department heads are military, but there's a super staff of senior executives that make the real work happen and provide continuity on a day-to-day basis. 50% of the population workforce outside of DC. You'll see them everywhere. You'll see them down at our centers like National Medical Intelligence Center, which is in Maryland. You'll see them at our Missile and Space Intelligence Center in Alabama. You'll see them in Charlottesville, where we have kind of a shared relationship with the Army, NGA, and other tenant holders. And you see them at the COCOMs. They're instrumental. DIA is a force provider for the J2, which really means that DIA runs and operates J2. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go down. And you see them out deployed in embassies. And I'll talk about that and break that down where we see it. And I call that, you know, 3 different levels that we'll talk about. All right, so courtesy of General Flynn, when he was DIA's director, we developed what we call a center's approach to how we operate DIA. What this did is it brought the analysts, it brought the collectors, or sometimes we call them operators, but collectors. It brought the techies, it brought the mission support, everyone together so we can create a better synergistic effect on how we do intelligence. I think it's leagues better than what we had, but it is not without problems because you got different cultures, different people, personalities working together, so it still requires a lot of harmonization to really get this synergistic effect that makes intelligence work that much better. But it's a great way to do it because we have started the conversations, the dialogue to get that happening. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 4 core competencies in the next few slides. Now, these are the competencies that really kind of really are the benchmark of what DIA does, and we really kind of form everything else around those. Not to say that there aren't others. There's tons of them. If you're a lawyer, a doctor, even a chaplain or a psychologist, they're there. So if you're a professional and you want to work for DIA, if there's an open and you can get hired, there's probably a place for you. All righty. Okay, operations. So when I first started working at DIA and they talked about operations, it's like, well, okay, how do you get from here to there? Whatever. Operations DIA is a little bit different. We really reserve that. Well, it's actually discussed both ways. It is discussed in some instances, well, how do we get from here to there, or a strategy or something like that, or how do we execute that? But it refers to, when we talk about competency, as our collectors, our overt collectors, our human collectors. I have a large long-term history with the human collectors because I worked in 3 places in Africa, dirty ones, Angola, and both the Congos, and then I trumped around the Middle East for quite a while, working security corporation and also coordinated with the collectors. What they do is they make, they define, they maintain, and they leverage relationships out in the field. And they do that so they can bring it back to the next section. The next company I'm going to talk about is an analyst. They can bring this information back, and then we can make something of it. We got the human collectors, like I was as a DAT. We got the clandestine collectors, and that was mentioned earlier. But these folks, probably circa 2010, there was a big push for DOD to come up with clandestine collectors that could go out and do the things that the overt collectors couldn't do. So we've got a nice set of those. They go out and do the tough things. Risk versus gain is part of their game. It's also part of the other, just the overt collectors at the attaches. But they're operating in the embassies and outside of the embassies in the tough places that people won't go. The next one is the counterterrorism folks, I believe. And they're important because they're out making sure that the bad guys can't stop us from doing what we need to do. The purest engagement for myself in this is working on these recurring assessments to make sure our leadership knows what to expect when they're going downrange and how to defeat it. For me, from a practical standpoint, I'm familiar with the folks who are actually out snooping and pooping because they'd ride behind me when I was in the Congo, and I'd figure out, well, why are you not behind me? And my boss would say, don't worry about it. They're perhaps keeping you safe because there's a lot of bad things out there. So sometimes our presence isn't negative, but it is important when a COCON commander goes downrange that he knows who's snooping and pooping behind him and what he can say and what he can't say or where he should say it. All right, of course, obviously, if you have these collectors, you have to have support. Okay, analysts, I think this is the muddy boots field that we have in DIA. So it's not the only field, and there's a lot of other important things happening as you saw in the video, but for the most part, everything collected comes back to the analyst, where the analyst can do their work and produce some product or service. We've got everything. We've got from the top list, it talks about the folks who are looking at military capabilities. They work with the National Ground Intelligence Center a lot. They tell us about, battalion formations. They talk about personalities. Everything you could think about linked to the conventional and sometimes non-conventional force, they handle that. We got folks who do infrastructures, and when I first started understanding this, it's like, why aren't they just engineers? Well, some of them are. And why do we need to do this? Well, infrastructure analysis is super, super important for targeteers. We do a lot of that, especially at the COCOM, working with those folks. So it's important for that. I was in the Congo, and I spent a lot of time going out with Air Force folks who were surveying airfields because they need to know if there's a contingency, can they land? And it's pretty important business. I went out one time, and folks said, well, we have a requirement to know about the roads. And I said, well, what about the roads? Well, same thing for contingencies. Well, interesting enough, in Angola, there are 3 people building roads. Chinese, the state, and Brazil. And depending on where you are, you can tell which kind of road you are on. And although the map says there's a road, the condition of the road is not indicated. So it becomes, or the bridge, that's not really there, that should be there. Or you still have to, ford across or something. So all these things are important as we look at it from analyst perspective. Science and technology, we'll talk about that one in a second. Counterintelligence. One of the most important ones that we execute on a day-to-day basis, which has wins us a lot of credit, is what we do in warning. Warning, and then I'm going to lump in there something Smitty and I did together, is working in the J2 and updating the J2 every day on what was happening across our domains. My particular domain was Africa. And I recall sitting there about 11, 12 o'clock at night and watching Africa light up, watching all the reporting come in. And then taking that report and making some sense out of it and producing a report so the J2 would understand what was happening. And many times those spot reports, if you will, I call them spot reports, they became short-term products, mid-term products, and perhaps even longer-term products that exist in the form of a National Intelligence Estimate, or NIE. All right. Okay, science and technology. So 2008-9, I call this group the up-and-coming group. I was at the National Intelligence University and working as an analyst and studying, and I was like, well, what does that mean? I had no idea. And today, it's a super important function because of the folks trying to acquire advanced technologies, of all the things they try and do to defeat our systems. So the science technology folks are working in those areas and really trying to do a good job to keep our systems current, hardened, and away from the adversaries. They do other things. If Tom was here, he'd probably give us a thumbs up about the space and counter space. The measurements, I was in Congo and I was involved in one of these measurement activities, or actually it was a continual thing, because I don't know if you know, but we, the USG, put a nuclear reactor in Congo, in Kinshasa, at the university. Well, we put it there and then we weren't there, so the question was, what are they doing with this nuclear reactor that they don't know how to run? So not only that, I was charged with, my ambassador would come to me periodically and says, Ro, you got to go out and test for particulates in the air or something, or test some device that people say is radioactive. So I said, forget it, if I got to do this, I got to go back to DC, get trained. And so I went all over the place, all over the Congo, even into Burundi and other places, testing all these devices. And no one wanted to do it because they were all concerned about having children in the future. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Last two, foreign material programs, super interesting. To go to the fairs and look at equipment, or go out and try and find some down bird or something and buy it so we can study it. And those are the guys who do it. Domex, super document piece there. 2 data points, 2003, 2004, Iraq, super huge. I was in Gutter working, and we saw those folks. They had a huge facility analyzing all these documents. Bring it fast forward to a guy called Coney. Does anybody remember Coney, Lord's Resistance Army? Don't hear that name too much, but he's still out there. But there was a huge piece of trying to understand all this coded language they were doing. The DocX folks, they do that. So pretty important capability for us in DIA trying to understand our environments. Okay, mission support. When I was lieutenant, we call this ash and trash. Well, we call it ash and trash, but it wasn't necessarily a pejorative thing. It was just where did it fit, how did it come? For us, it's not ash and trash is important. All the other competencies I talked about depend on these folks to get it done. Same way as we did when we were lieutenants, to tell you the truth. So the communications, we mentioned that in the film, from the White House down to all these secure facilities, like we have one here. We validate those, we maintain those. When I was in COCOM, AFRICOM, I guess a year ago, I had 4 computer systems that I had to check regularly. All these great geniuses would come by and make sure those systems were ready to check. And I didn't want to check them, but I had to check them because it was necessary to do my job. The training piece. So I mentioned National Intelligence University. That's where we send some fortunate folks to go get master's degrees when they get hired. Some of them have to do it at night, and some of them have to do it on the weekend. But it's a great training educational opportunity. We have trainers who do that also. So in our training folks, as we promulgate intelligence training across the enterprise. All right, so we talked about the core components, we talked about our boss, our mission. So how do we kind of make this thing happen? So when I first got here, people would ask me, it's like, what does DIA do for the military? What do they do for the Army? How does this work? And so I started thinking about it. It's like, well, I have no idea because I only worked in Africa and all this. And then when I started peeling back down, you said, man, I've done so many things and neat things. It's like, yeah, I understand how this works. We just expand it and think about it. Here we go. So I came up with a 3-level type thing. Level analysis for us good political scientists. We kind of work at 3 different areas. The National Capital Region, NCR, at the COCOMs, down the operating environment. So what about the National Capital Region? Well, this is where we're into this whole policy shaping, pushing, influencing, delivering of products and services. And I'll call it product, I'll define it, trying to define it as some written documentation that we produce that is disseminated. And I'll call a service, as we define it, as when we go and talk to somebody. So we do a lot of that, talking to ambassadors, to policymakers, to Congress people, shaping, again, influencing. We're also involved in the enterprise activities. I might mention foreign disclosure. We're the authority for foreign disclosure across the DoD. We manage who you can release information to and how it's released. It's huge. It's probably, I think there's a significant amount of people in this enterprise trying to make sure this is right, because we want to give information, but do we not want to give information? How do we do it? How do we reject it? And what will they do with it? And you all probably have a story after you spent 20 years in the military, how people didn't use information right. And by the way, I did say something about strategic surprise. There's a lot of yes, who did it and why. Well, it's the same thing. If there's a spill, a data spill, or unauthorized disclosure, there's a lot of angst to try and get this right. So it's very important to us. I was actually project manager for foreign disclosure in terms of trying to get the education right, and that was pretty interesting work. Okay, analyst training, I talked about NIU. Joint responsibilities, the warning analysis. We're responsible for producing the operational environment and analysis for the J2. So it affects anyone going down to work in any area of operations for a COCOM. Hey, the template for what's happening and what the enemy is doing comes through DIA and is executed by our analysts. All right, and more importantly is the DoD Human Authority. So anybody wants to go down and snoop and poop, it's us at DIA who kind of manage that whole process. Intelligence community type responsibilities, DIA. I think when the FBI individual came, he talked about the NIPIF, the National Intelligence Priorities Framework. And this is an important document because it tells us who is important, what assets we should allocate to this problem, and what type of other resources. It helps us figure out the money when the folks, our leadership goes to our, the government, the senior leaders. So it's pretty important. We're involved in that. We're involved in the whole ISR type we're involved in helping ensure once on the ground the dynamic exchanges of these assets occurs. And up and down this whole chain, there's coordination and collaboration, and it's vertical and it's horizontal. At the COCOMs, I think this is the confluence of where DIA meets the services and supports the services. Given the fact that 74%, I think the mirror is about the same, about 74%, or the majority of the folks working in the COCOM, the J2's Operations Center, they are DIA employees, they're doing the work. Now, you don't necessarily see a little tag says, I'm DIA working, doing this work, but the nature of the fact that they're there running these centers, providing the continuity, makes them demonstrate DIA's reach and DIA's capability down to the services. Everything that happens in the J2, down in the operating environment, are down lower than the J2 just per se, is influenced or controlled or coordinated through J2 ops, which means J2 personnel doing it. In many cases, in most J2s, the senior person, besides the second senior person in the J2, is a DIA employee. That person is either a deputy or an assistant. And always the lead analytical person in a COCOM is a DIA employee. So by virtue of the fact that we're there and we're leading, we are working with the services, providing goods and services and products for the services, and that's kind of where we meet. So that's how we service them. That's one way. We'll get down a little bit further. So again, the question, I may have posed this question, one of my prep questions was, prompt questions are we getting to the foxhole? Well, we're trying to get there. Oh, you can't, oh, it went off? Okay, sorry. Is it working? Oh, okay, all right, okay. Okay, this grounds me, so we'll see. All right, so across the staff, our COCOM staff, I mean, it's kind of arranged just like the J2's arranged just like anywhere else, the J5s, like the J staff. The only difference is the J25, it normally works just plans and not engagement. And the J5s, they kind of merged, they kind of migrated back in the day from J4 doing an engagement to J5 taking responsibility for the engagement and plans. And the J29 does that. So it's kind of separate function. The planning is separate from the engagement, which I think is a pretty good idea, which means that our J29 folks work more closely with the J5 section and COCOMs. Okay, down to the operation environment. All right, so what do we have down there? We'll see all our presence of DIA folks in the embassies, the defense attaché positions, or the civilian attachés who are out collecting, or the clan folks who are civilians and military out collecting and doing things associated with the embassy and not, but they're executing that function. We'll see those folks down working on task force. My favorite task force to talk about is CJTF HOA, or the Horn of Africa. It's a huge task force. Our our personnel are in and out of that place on a recurring basis. The reason is because the shelf life of a analyst, a military analyst in the Horn of Africa is about 6 months, because it's all reserve folks going through there. So we need to bring the DIA blood that has a long-term view into the analysis section so that they can properly advise the commander at that time to get his job done. We in all this, say again? Okay, good. I can walk around again. I'm not grounded anymore, so I love it. Okay, so as we get closer down to the foxhole, we have what we call is the National Intelligence Support Teams. I started reading about this one day and realized that this is an incredible thing. And so then I pull up the website, and it's like, hey, this day in history, National Intelligence Support Teams were formed. And I was like, all right, man, so I'm on the right track. What these things are they are groups of people pulled from across IC. It could be just DIA folks, it could be CIA folks, it could be a combination. And what they're tasked to do, and this is after the coordination, remember it goes up, it's like, hey, I'm down in the operating environment, I'm a commander, and I have a problem. That problem's coordinated back through military services to the COCOM commander, the J2 in the COCOM, who is the only authorized authority to coordinate requirements back to DC or back to National Capital Region. And the team gets put together and it goes down to work on the problem. That problem may be at the COCOM level. The problem may be at the division core. It may be at the task force level. It may even be down to the foxhole, possibly. But whatever the problem is, we can actually put together, we're capable of doing it. And that kind of gets us to back to that whole service support, combat support agency. It brings us from the DC level and the normal DC operating functions down through the COCOM, all the way down to the operating environment, touching the soldier or influencing what's happening around the soldier on the ground. It's pretty important stuff. And when you get to do some of this, I'll give you a footnote. I'm sitting in my office one day, and I like to talk about this, and I'm reading the paper, when we used to read papers, and it says, Tommy Franks is put on the line and the Egyptians have to deploy something. And I'm reading the article, and it's basically saying exactly what I said minus a couple of words. And then the Egyptians deployed. And I'm thinking, this is important. What we do is super important. So making sure that DIA gets this right from the NCR all the way down to the foxhole is necessary, is pretty critical. And like the clip said, there's people who are sworn to do this, and they do it every day, and they do it well. Okay, how are we doing on time? All right, so I have a friend who said one day a picture's worth 1,000 words, and hopefully this was not too jammed up with 1,000 words. But as we kind of move through this, talked about how we operate on 3 levels, I want to kind of bring it down to kind of how this actually works, what you would see. And you won't see this in, we're at circle number 1 today, circle number 2, but it's almost inherent in an organization. And many of the intelligence agencies, they use the intelligence cycle to explain things. So I kind of was sitting around, I said, well, it's just like writing a thesis. We're going to write a thesis, we come up with a question or a problem, and we try and figure that out. What's the problem? What's the question? Then we go in, we say, oh, we got to sit around in the second circle here as we go clockwise, plan direction. We got to write some methodology. We got to figure out how to get at this question. What's the framework? What's the environment around it? And then we got to go figure out how to, we use that methodology and we collect. We actually go and get the data. Once we get the data, we try and figure it out and we process it. So I got a bunch of data. I read all these different authors and we process it. And we take that processed data and we analyze it, categorize it, make it so it makes sense, pull the conclusions, the assessments, and then we disseminate this. We disseminate this, again, in several different ways. One is with paper products or written products or with goods and services. And I might add another one, could be video. If you go back to the collection circle here, if you're collecting information and you're supporting an ally, and allies are important today, let's say France and Africa is getting ready to do an execution, and you provide them with live video feed, you're actually disseminating that feed to them right here. Now that doesn't stop the process because that information still goes back, it's processed, analyzed, and there's some type of written product that can come of it. So, but it's a nice circle, so you'll see As you go around the outer circle, the policy, I'm not going to talk about this too much, but you have these folks I've highlighted. Some of them look highlighted, some of them don't. But at different parts around this circle, they're more important players. For the first part requirements, the policymakers, the agencies, and even allies are pretty important. By the time you get to the second part, they're not. And as we go around, you see who's principal in some of these things. But they all it's interchangeable, so it's not some fixed way, but we all have a part to play as we go through this process. Maybe techies here, and I think the techies, not too many people. We do use our allies a lot to help us do this processing piece today because there are shortages across in certain places. All right, feedback all the time. Who are our customers? Okay, so I'm going to talk around our customers, but we'll go to the cheat side of this slide and you'll see some of those customers. Decision advantage to reduce strategic surprise. It speaks to our policymakers, our leaders, even our allies, all these people who have a stakeholder interest in what's going on in the operating environment. They're our customers. Well, I said at the beginning, I talk about kind of at the end a system of systems. Well, I look at all this as a system of systems. The IC community, the international community, is kind of the big box we'll play in. And if I could have got a circle, I'd put a circle there. But we talked about DIA and we used the intelligence cycle. We talked about the competencies. All these things DIA has to negotiate if they have a requirement and figure out how to collect on it, how to produce intelligence, how to disseminate that intelligence. They're coordinated internally and they're coordinated externally with the rest of the IC. If you think about this, if the example is a national intelligence estimate where everybody's playing in this, it becomes much more important and the framework makes a lot more sense, to me at least. So if you have DIA has got their piece of this pie for this national intelligence estimate, and you got the CIA or Homeland Security or someone else who has their piece, they're going through and they're figuring out with their intelligence cycle how to collect this information, disseminate this information. And then at the Office of the National Intelligence Director, he's tasked with coordinating all this information, making sure it's structured right and it answers the question and it perhaps goes into a product like the NIE. And then that goes out to our customers. Goes out to our customers to provide the same things I mentioned, the whole mission. When we go back to the one slide with all the agencies to provide all this policy support to support our president, the USG, and help us survive in this global environment and today's strategic realities, which, and ensure our interests. Okay, let's see where we got now. All right, I think that's probably enough. I'll open up the questions if you have any.
What has been your favorite job that you've done with the DIA? Favorite position?
Defense attaché. This one here. This one here. Actually, I like grading papers. I think that's kind of neat. So, the first one is defense attaché. There's two. I'll give you two. One is defense attaché, but all the jobs I've had, I've enjoyed them immensely. Defense attaché because you're autonomous. So you're lieutenant colonel level or colonel level. There's no one telling you what to. Well, there's always someone telling you what to do, but you have a lot of flexibility to either kill yourself or make yourself great, and you actually get to see the fruits of your labor. So it's a great job. For doing what you need to do. It's all on you. You got lots of bosses. It's all on you, but it's a great job, and it's one of the most autonomous jobs I've ever had in my life, where you bring everything, every tool that you've ever used probably in your career together to make something happen. And the other job is analyst. I really get a kick out of sitting in front of my screen and reading about Africa for 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day. Let's make it more realistic, 4 or 5 hours a day. That's pretty cool. It's kind of a, if I were to talk to you around the corner, you'd have some interesting words to say about that. I would too probably, but it really makes me feel good to take the vacuum cleaner approach to some problem and come up with something that makes sense and that you can see that product when you write it and it's produced. So I really like that job too.
Actors that you're collecting information on. I noticed you had some state actors, and then when it got to cyber, it was listed as cyber threat as more of the capability itself. Would you mind going into a little bit of how much of that are you seeing as filed away into state actors side, and how much of it is in the non-state actors side, and then how much of it is just that capability itself?
Yeah, so I will tell you, one is we'll extinguish the length of my capability or my intelligence. First of all, we go too deep in that one. Two is it could sneak into the classified side. But what I would tell you is again, as I said, this whole science and technology thing, I think in 2009 was up and coming player. People probably didn't understand how to put it. It's like, oh, what does it mean? Well, the central thing that there's, since we have it, say bifurcated into two things is one is what are the bad guys doing to try and attack us, our systems? That's a significant responsibility of the science technology guys. How are we looking at protecting our systems so we can continue keeping the White House operating and folks operating out here? So that's a significant part. So the techs who actually go out and try and figure out what's going on and what's happening. And so the second part of that is is how do we analyze this and how do we produce something that informs the rest of forms the IC and supports our allies and those things like that. So it's not so I can't really talk to you specifics about the non-state actor versus the state actor. I mean, we could probably kind of take a map and generally map who has these capabilities. The interesting thing is that this capability is easy to achieve in many cases now, so it's all over the place. So when you could say Africa was maybe couldn't do this, there are people who, if you think about Al Qaeda and those folks going off and going to school and coming back and bringing this capability, it's super, super important in Africa how they use these capabilities, including social media. So it's really, we look at from the standpoint, again, there's a stamp and I'll finish, is how can we survive, our survivability? How do we maintain our ability to operate and those folks who we support? And then again, is analyzing that, producing it, and helping people understand the phenomena, what's happening in the cyber realm, and where they want to go, more importantly, because it's happening now, where they want to go. And then work with Cybercom, if you will, to try and figure out how to defeat that. Sir.
In the advent of more and more data coming into an organization like DIA, into data overload, how do you get that data transformed into information that they can make decisions with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I went back to DIA to work as an analyst, I think 2010. So in 2010, we're overwhelmed, still overwhelmed. This is the first level is, the analyst sitting there just reading all this stuff all day long. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. And now, as we move forward, DIA really kind of embraces this big data analytics piece, will help us look, especially when you talk about the big trends, pulling out data that's supportive, highlighting data that's supportive, that may help the analyst in his work. So it is definitely something that everyone's looking at. It's an important, piece to look at, but I'm gonna tell you, you can easily get overwhelmed. There's so much, and so much that so much that seems to parallel what you see in the secure realm, or the secret realm. There's a lot of things that seem to have characteristics that are in the open source realm, which adds to the flavor. So we're all source analysts. Most of the agencies, I believe, are all source analysts. So what do you pick and where do you pick from it? And this group of batch of data that came in today, which one do you pick is very tough. It is definitely a challenge, and it's something that they look at very cautiously today. Sir.
How are you handling in that the hacking of our information in that, basically in that the information is coming in, but there are people in that want to find out in that what kind of information we have, and thereby in that find out who's giving them us the information so they can eliminate the threat.
Yeah, so I mean, you talk sources and methods, that type of thing, and a little bit of that, and that's pretty cool. It's super important. We also, what I'll kind of say is that, we're part of the USG, and so we all suffer from these incursions and how they happen. Our play in this as DIA is really, supporting, is figuring out, again, the hard in our pieces, what we can do. And in the analysis, if you will, really supports the greater work of Cybercom, which is in charge of figuring out how to counter these huge threats that come against USG. And that's, from what I understand, It's inclusive of lots of other thoughts about how do we bring the greater organizations, communities involved in this, because it's not just our data, it's banking data and everything else. So it is a huge problem, and obviously we're working the best. USG is working the best to get that right. But for us, it's how to heart. We're really concerned with, hey, those attacks are coming. If they're coming, how do we prepare? What's the next phase? How do we harden those systems? And that's kind of what the science and technology guys are focused on mostly. Again, the other part is the analysis and getting that back out into the system so everybody can see this is what happened to us, or this is what we see, figure out how to counter that, cybercom. Ma'am.
So right here, we have the young majors that we're teaching here at CGSC. It's probably where your elective comes in. What advice would you give to those young analysts? Because you talked about General Franks using your words, but he's far removed from the warfighter and the planner at the echelons below corps.
Yep.
So what would your advice be to them on how to link in or kind of work through the stuff to get the real-time information and intel down to the actual warfighter on the ground? From your 30 years of experience, what would you tell them? How would they to work through that stuff?
So what I would tell you is real-time data is much more current down, floating around below COCOM than we have at the COCOM, and even at DIA, because everything's serialized, if you will, or put into a system, and then the analysts get that. So you're probably going to get the most current data as tactical analysts down in the battalions and the divisions and corps. That data is probably most current. Where DIA comes in, and the other IC members, I believe, is this important niche of taking this data. It's not the big data thing, but really kind of taking all the data in, and looking at the trends, and really looking at how this affects the operational environment, because we're responsible for continuing to update that and looking at where we're going to go. And not only just looking at it, providing those challenges and those opportunities so that policymakers can shape policy that influences what happens all the way down to the tactical level. So it's kind of like that whole, it's really this whole feedback loop that, starting from a spot report, going through the analysis at the ACE, and then, coming back serialized in the system, analysts taking a look at the aggregate of all these things and producing some intelligence. So that young analyst won't necessarily see it, that he got something from, well, he can reach back and eventually see products, because there's a way to do that, but he really won't be affected on a day-to-day basis right away. He's going to see more of what's happening in his domain than we will, then you'll see at the COCOM or really directly at DIA. Now, the person who will see the most, that you get it on a time-to-time basis, which is how you plug into how these units plug into the embassy if they're out in the operating environment. They may have access to the defense attaché. They may have much more timely information, because he's leveraging what he's seeing literally himself and what he's seeing from his colleagues as he's working with host nationals out in the field. So that's one way to. Now, I would like to add a little bit more, but this is not specifically to your point, is I think what we should tell our young analysts going out in the field is that they need to understand from their perspective the operating environment. And that means there's a layered approach to becoming a professional, more knowledgeable about where you're going to operate. Because once you get there, it's hard to get it, because you're just working. So if you got time and you know where you're going, you need to layer yourself. It's the layering with the book knowledge, it's the layering with the courses, it's the layering with understanding what the prevailing thought is about those areas. It's kind of like a big triangle. It's like at the top of the triangle, I know as much as I can know about this place, and then I got the foundational stuff that goes back. That's the best way to be able to be flexible in your environment. Because in many cases, people go out there and they're operating, they have no idea why this band of people with cows cross this line, and they keep crossing it every year. Well, we know they crossed and they killed 15 people, but why did they do that? What's the history on that? So the best way to prep these analysts is to have them to go and sit down. I know we're doing a better job at the military, is to understand their environment as much as they can, and to think critically. And I'm going to define that as, yes, I know what USG policy says, or you can understand that, and you need to, but you need to understand, it's like a preposition. Here's USG policy. You need to understand all the prepositions around that policy. Is that policy valid? Does it make sense? What does the adversary think? So I'm a fail, so we get trained or taught, and after you get beat into the head, how does the other guy think? It's super important, because what it does is allows you to become flexible enough to provide this very, very timely decision advantage advice to your commanders. Whether you're a J5er or a J2er, that's what I think.
Time for one more question, if we have one. Not? All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all once again for coming to this iteration of the Brown Bag. I'll remind you of our two notes, 26 February, 1800, down at the Riverfront Community Center, downtown Leavenworth, World War I Pershing Lecture Series, where we'll hear about the Army, U.S. Army's occupation of Germany after the war. And then obviously, once again, our next iteration of our monthly Brown Bags right here, same time, same location, 5 March. The CG Journal Lundy will be here to talk about interagency leadership. Thank you. Oh, statistically speaking, there's 2 of us out here that have forgot that it's Valentine's Day. So if that applies to you, then I did my good deed for the day. You might need to do something before you go home this evening.